This is WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM. And we have with us at WZRD via Zoom Mark Armstrong, a journalist and activist. How are you today, Mark?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Very well. So when you did you start your journalistic career as an intern, or was the with Associated Press, or was the did you do other things journalistically even before that?
Well, I work with my school newspaper, and it's important to note my school newspaper because I broke a very important story that everybody else slept on um, back in, I would say, 84. And that was Jesse Jackson Sr., Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.'s first White House bid. So I got a tip at that time when I was writing for the Courier. That was the school newspaper for the Clark College Atlanta, which we
Mhm.
also used kind of a lab paper from Lisa Sullivan, the late Lisa Sullivan, who became an attorney at that time. She was one of the heads of the Pan Africanist organization, and I had jumped on some stories that had given me before. So they trusted me with having that tip because they knew I would do something with it. So they told me to go to the Omni on a certain day, and I can't remember what day it was. The Omni, which is a big entertainment complex, which still exists, and try to catch Jesse Jackson and ask him if he were running for president. And this would have been the first time. So I got down to the Omni, the full court Atlanta press and regional press, including the Atlanta Constitution Journal. And he was in the company of Jimmy Carter and Andrew Young, who I believe Andrew Young was still mayor at the time of Atlanta. So I shouted out, uh, Mr. Jackson or Reverend Jackson, is it true that you're planning to run for president? And Andrew Jackson kind of skedaddled out of the way. Jimmy Carter said, I have no comment about that. And he had this very telling look, like, how in the bleep did he find out about that? And then Jesse Jackson was the last one to answer. And he said, I'm not ready to discuss that yet. So I was like, so it's true that you are planning to run. And then he kind of left. And nobody else jumped on that story.
Mhm.
So
Oh.
I ran that story. The only, I guess, pitfall of running that story was the headline because I couldn't come up with a headline that fit for the news. So I said Reagan enlivens the crowd, which he did. Did it was a rally, and everybody was kind of saying, "Oh, so you're doing propaganda for Ronald Reagan now?" I was like, "Certainly not." The intern stuff for the AP was reporting election returns.
Mhm.
I think during mid-year, I want to say it was a midterm election, and so I reported election returns for that. And then after that, I became a what was called the county reporter for the Piedmont, for the Greenville Piedmont, which was then an evening daily um, in upstate South Carolina. It since has been absorbed by the Greenville News. So now the Greenville News is the only game in town as far as a major daily out of Greenville, South Carolina. But
Mhm.
my coverage there for them was participating in a team coverage for Ronald Reagan's visit to Greenville Technical College, which was kind of like a campaign stop.
Mhm.
And I was reporting out of the Greenville International Airport because it was not too far from the technical college. And I actually ended up running into some people I had known from my college days who
Mhm.
were there as well. So
Back to
that's
the
how kind of got my
yes.
start
Mhm.
in public affairs reporting.
Back when that first story you get told us about the the press corps being also at that when you uh, spoke out the question to Jesse Jackson Sr. about running for president.
Well,
Uh,
this was before the press corps, but I was with my school newspaper back then.
oh,
Just
so it
clear.
was. Oh, I thought that there was a whole bunch of other press over there too, maybe for something else, right? For the Reagan, the
Like the
Reagan
Atlanta
event.
press corps. Yeah, there was like the Atlanta press corps,
Uh-huh.
and some other regional news organizations like AP or whatever, but none of
Mhm.
them reported that story. They didn't report on him running until he had made the official announcement.
Mhm. Yeah, that was kind of hard for you too to report on that because you couldn't reveal your source. You didn't have the sources, but you knew that it was very likely true.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I
Did,
said, they had given me some reliable tips before, especially
mhm,
Lisa Sullivan,
mhm,
who, like I said, became a civil rights attorney.
mhm,
So I trusted them with giving me the tip because I knew it was reliable, and they trusted me because I was reliable to report it.
mhm. But you were very young at that time. So how did you start your connection with them?
Um, with the school newspaper or with the Greenville
I
Piedmont.
guess when that was when you were with the school newspaper when they trusted you with the tip, but you were a college reporter. How did you establish that connection with the tipster?
Well,
Or just Lisa
I
Sullivan?
was a journalism student back then, and I
Mm,
had reported on another story that before the Jesse Jackson thing, I had covered as part of my coursework of the Wayne Williams murders trials,
mm,
and before that, um, I had reported on a debate that became abortive between a PhD. I think he was a PhD candidate, or he already had a PhD, named Columbus Keebler, and he
mhm.
was a Pan Africanist as well, and David Duke. So
Oh.
they had planned to have a debate between the two. And I kind of was kind of an insider on that because I was trying to arrange for the interview to be broadcast on the college station WCLK, and that was stopped by the administration because they were kind of really leery about the fallout from that.
Mhm.
But from
Uh,
there, Lisa and her group really trusted me as far as reporting tips that they gave me. Because
mm.
again, I would do something with them while the other ones would just kind of sit there and look real crazy.
The Wayne Williams, is he the serial killer, right?
Yes, that was the guy that's convicted of the serial killings
Mhm.
that are
Okay.
still in question at the time.
Mhm. And what about the what? So you Jesse Jackson Senior did not confirm your
No, his
question.
body language said it all.
Uh-huh. So were you able to do a story?
I have this. Well, I will break it down the expressions. So Andrew Young kind of had this. My name is Wes, and I ain't never in that mess when he's get out of on. Uh, Carter had this very concerned look, like how in the bleep did he find out about that? And I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. And
Did
Jesse
you
Jackson Senior
right? Did you
really had like,
oh okay,
how
yeah.
did he find out about this?
Mm-hmm. Well, how did you use it at all? Did you try to go further with it? Besides writing about the Reagan event, were you able to use that information for another article on the same topic?
No, and when I think about it, if I had to do it all over again, I would have done a follow-up story,
Mm-hmm.
but I just kind of stuck with that story because there were so many other stories that were going on, and I was concentrating on doing my senior theses and trying, trying to graduate
Mm-hmm.
and get out of there and get to the real world of working journalism.
Mm-hmm. So
So after, I'm sorry, go ahead.
it was after that you went to North Carolina and Greenville.
Well,
Greenville.
South Carolina
Oh,
and
so
yeah.
South Carolina. Yes.
But I covered some historic things besides the Ronald Reagan thing while I was at the Piedmont. For
Mm-hmm.
example, by covering the county board, I was able to cover the first Black member of the Greenville County Board.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Emmis Fant. He has since become a state representative. I don't know if he's still a state representative, but when I last looked, he had become a state representative.
How was he able to did you find out how he was able to achieve the office in such an environment in South Carolina in Greenville?
Well, number one, at that time, that he got elected, the Greenville County Board had been pretty much lily white. Um, there was a woman named Sally Crumley. She became the first woman elected to the county board.
Mhm.
So Greenville County was going through some non-traditional changes. And so there were people that were fed up with not having any diverse representation, I'll put it that way, on the county board. And Sally Crumley, who was a very rambunctious Democrat who looked out for her residents, supported was the first diversification on the board, and then Ennis became the second diversification. But the Piedmont and the Greenville News at the time were fairly conservative, and I would say pro-Reagan,
Mhm.
to the point that they tried to intimidate Ennis by running some kind of editorial against him. And apparently somebody, one of the editorial writers, threatened him with it before it was even published. So Ennis and I had a good relationship because we were both Black, and because I was much fairer than the prior county board county reporters. The county reporters tended to support the conservative Reagan line, and they were very anti-Democrat. And so they would present the Democrats on the board, who are some pretty good people, I have to say, as um, conservative and transitant Democrats, while the Republicans at the time were presented as liberal and what have you. In fact, the second woman that was elected to the Greenville County Board was a woman named Gail Crawford, and she was Republican. And so she and Sally Crumley were often at odds. So anyway, make a long story short, this story was apparently waved in front of or read to Ennis over the phone, and they were going to really bash him. So I happened to call Ennis because he was one of my sources at the time, and he made some off the cuff remark when I called him about, well, I guess you're in with them too. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he told me the story about this editor or one of his surrogates reading this editorial to him. And I told him, let me call you back. And I walked over to where they were doing the layouts. This was before pagination. And I saw the story, and I went back and I said, I'm going to talk to my managing editor because this is not supposed to happen. That is we had a employee handbook that said you could not engage in politics like that and use the newspaper's name for that. So I talked to my managing editor,
Mhm.
and did an about face on that policy and told me that I was naive and didn't I know this was a Republican paper. I said, well, that's interesting because when you hired me, you told me that we were supposed to be bipartisan and neutral, which I've never believed in, not objective. And I've never believed in objectivity, but I did toe the line on that, on fairness at least. So when he told me that, by that time, Sally Crumley, who was pretty much the whip for the Democrats and who pushed everybody, called me, and I talked to her about what to do. And I told her about the discussion I had with my managing editor. And she got the chair of the Greenville County Democratic Party on the line. And I told her, what you need to do is call the administrative staff, the publisher, and then some, and tell them that that it is in their our employee policy that we are not supposed to do that, and that is a major conflict of interest, and that we will be calling out this newspaper for bias if you go through with this editorial. So after I got off the phone with her, because the chair of the party, the Democratic Party, at least in Greenville County, sounded like he was scared poopless. So they did as they were told. All of a sudden, everybody came to me and wanted to know what happened. And I said, oh, I don't know anything because I'm naive. But this is what I told you is what I told you. Now, what you do with it is your little red wagon. So it ended up that they pulled that editorial, and I saved not only the newspaper's reputation, but I saved my own reputation because that was going to affect me greatly if I did not clear that up.
Mhm. Okay.
And I had a similar incident um, where I reported something that was truthful, but didn't look good for the Republican Party. And so the Republicans on the county board decided they were going to boycott me and not really talk to me.
Mm.
And the chair of the Republican Party, who lived down the block from me, came over to my house, my apartment at the time, and told me that the hostilities were suspended and that he did not agree with what they were doing. And actually, one of the county board counselors' wives actually spoke up for me. And she said, y'all can't do that to him like that. And actually, I didn't tell them this, but she was actually feeding me some stuff about the Republicans, what the Republicans and the Democrats were going to do. Her name was Marilyn Leach, and I still remember Marilyn. Every time she would tell me something, she would say, "If you," in her little North Carolina drawl, "if you say I said it, I'll deny it."
Mhm. Were you the only African American journalist in the organization, or were there others as well?
At that time, I was the only one reporting. We did have, for the Piedmont, one black copy editor.
Mm.
But yeah, everybody was. I was the spook who sat by the door, as Sam Greenlee would say. But yeah, I was the only black at that time. The rest were white. I would say they were mostly women,
Mhm.
so I was like a handful of men. And the only other black face at the newspaper were that would even be connected as journalists was one black copy editor.
Mm. How did you get the position?
I got the position because I was recommended by my college, and they flew me in, and they told me that I might have to fly myself back, so I got some money for that. And they were so delighted with the interview that they flew me back
Mm. Okay.
from their dime.
So, you applied for the job, and then your college recommended you, or you
Yeah, my college recommended me because they were looking for more blacks and more. I hate to use the word minorities, but they were looking for more people who didn't happen to be white
Mm.
to diversify their staff.
Could you shut off that other device that has me? Because we're going into a feedback loop. I think you have another device that's open with to this, like listening to the interview, and there is a feedback loop happening earlier.
Okay, let me see if because I thought I closed all my hold on, just a split second. Let me just check.
Sure, thank you.
I think wait, maybe if I turn off this air cooler because I don't have air conditioning. Let me see. Is that better?
Let me. Yeah, I think it's no. I still hear myself. I must have something else that is on that's causing the feedback loop.
Okay, I just turned off everything because I still had one thing on. Okay, what
Okay.
about now?
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
That's
with
yeah. That
cool.
much better. Thank you so much.
No problem. I was trying
Okay.
to keep
So
it
what?
so hot.
So how did you? What about the Associated Press? You know, at that time it wasn't easy. Even right now, it's hard to get a job at the to intern with the Associated Press. How did you get that internship?
Well, at that time, I was a student member of the Society of Professional Journalists, Sigma Delta Pi. It's
Mm.
now Society of Professional Journalists because they dropped because it started off as a fraternity for
Uh,
journalism.
uh-huh.
So they were looking for a top student, and I had the top marks in my department. So I was recommended by my department to intern for Associated Press.
Mm. So they had an opening, or was the department was actually sending someone there every year?
I believe they probably did it every year. That was the only time I did it because there were other, before me that were juniors and seniors that got it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was recommended through my department and through my school chapter of Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi.
Mm-hmm. And when you uh, how long were you there as an intern with the Associated Press?
Well, I was there a few days because again, this was reporting election returns.
Oh, okay.
The big push where I really cut my teeth as a public affairs journalist was at the Greenville Piedmont.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay.
Learned a lot reporting about reporting. Period, more
Mm.
than when I was in school. Um, I also did features besides the government reporting um, that involved some. Every year they would send me, for example, to the South Carolina beauty pageant, Miss South Carolina beauty pageant.
Mm.
And the last time I covered it, there was a big schism about just some improprieties with the way the judging went on, forcing the girls to use a certain designer, use a certain um, charm school person. The stuff
Mm.
that you heard about maybe a few years ago was going on back then, and the then Miss South Carolina, I think that was like '86, blew the lid off the whole thing, and it
Mm.
was a major scandal. I also
Did
got
you
to
have any? Did you
interview.
have anything to? Did you have anything to do with that investigation to the tip or anything to start it off?
Well, no, I didn't. I didn't set off the tip, but I did report on it. I did try to dig more on it, but the pageant officials were going to be very tight-lipped about it, and so it was sort of like it came down to a he said, she said. One of the more interesting interviews I had was with Dale Evans, Roy Rogers' wife. If you know about Roy Rogers, the cowboy singer and movie
Mm.
star and all that, religion star.
Mm.
And started off as a very boring interview because I was the only male, by the way, and I was the only black person in that interview, do that group interview, which was at some hotel, it seems to me.
Oh.
And um, they started off with, um, can you tell us about the struggles of being a mother and a woman working woman? I'm thinking this is just ridiculous. Lucille Ball was a mother and a working woman or whatever. What's so interesting about that versus something else? So Dale Evans kept talking about the big studio pictures and how they were sort of uh, uh, moved to the left because of them. And so I raised the question of don't you think you protest too much that maybe it was the big box projects that kept you sustained? And she narrowed her eye and went off. And she said, "Let me tell you something, young man. It is the B movies that we were in that upheld the big box projects like Gone with the Wind and made it
Mm.
possible for." And she kept on that, and whereas everybody was kind of like kind of lackadaisical and laid back, all of a sudden you saw this frenetic writing on notebooks. Did I raise that question? And
Mm.
she pitched the world fit about that, and she kept talking about it even as the thing broke up, and she kept looking at me like, how dare you
Mm.
raise that point when it was the other way around. I
Mm.
also to interview Kathy Truitt when he
Mm.
was still living, the founder of Chick-fil-A.
Oh.
And although Chick-fil-A has this reputation of being racist and Christian evangelical and all that, he was a very nice man.
Mm.
In
And
fact,
you interviewed him before the scandal broke, right? About the Chick-fil-A being
yeah,
racist?
yeah, yeah, decades before. And he had this group of little boys. They were all, nicely dressed in the same kind of color suit
Mm.
and well behaved. And that's the only odd thing I found about him. Other than that, he was just a very personal guy. And we had a policy at the time at the Piedmont and at the Greenville News that you were not supposed to accept any gifts, any free food, anything of such a kind. And he just worried me and worried me. Oh, get you something to eat. No, there's plenty. And I was like, I really can't do it. And finally, just to shut him up, I ate a chicken burger.
Hmm. And the boys, how old were they? How?
I would say they would have been anywhere between 5 and I want to say tweens, like maybe 10 years old, might have been the oldest.
Hmm.
They were very young. I didn't see any teenagers, or at least any teenagers I knew of.
Hmm.
They were very young boys, and these were boys he said he sponsored.
Sponsored for what did he say?
And he supported them, kind of like a foster father.
Oh, hmm, got it.
Yeah, he didn't say he adopted them, but he's kind of like a foster father
Hmm.
to them. And he only did boys, he didn't do girls.
Hmm. How hard was it being a black journalist in the South at that time? How hard was it to get access?
Um, Well, I got access. Well, at first, I had a difficult time getting access because I was working for what was pretty much considered a pro-Republican newspaper.
Hmm.
So I think that was more my problem than being black.
Hmm.
And there was a woman, I don't know if she's still alive now. She was the HR person. Her name was Martha Harnish. And Martha Harnish, we had a little dialogue over the phone after I got to meet her and interview her for a county board commission meeting, I think it was, or some kind of committee meeting, separate of the county board. And she put in a good word for me, and I started getting more access because at the time, I couldn't even get an advance copy of the agenda,
Hmm.
county clerk
Hmm. And,
office.
and whereas your white counterparts, did they get it?
Oh, they could easily get it.
Hmm.
One, because they were white,
Hmm. Hmm. So,
and two, relationships, because the ones I had talked with, they had been there for a little while.
mhm,
Now, as far as other stuff outside the newsroom, I did have a hard time trying to get an apartment
mm,
because there were some landlords that did not want to rent to black. And so
mhm,
one of the reporters knew of an opening where she was at because it was a house and it had been subdivided into 3 apartments. There was a, a what I would consider a basement apartment or lower apartment,
mhm,
and then there were 2 back-to-back upper apartments at grade level. And so she got me into the apartment at grade level.
mm.
Oh,
That that was very helpful.
yeah, that
Earlier
was
you were
very.
Yeah, earlier you were
Now,
talking about it seemed as if it were special interests, and then were those special interests uh you, trying to get the money? Because let's see what it was that we were discussing. I think it was when you were at the Piedmont, and then you were covering
yeah, public affairs, county government. I was on the county beat, or I was a county reporter.
yes.
As far as the money, there were battles over money and how it should be spent among special interests. And when they couldn't get what they wanted, the Democrats were not above holding the budget hostage, not to the point where it would shut the government down, but they were kind of like, if you Republicans don't give us what we want, we're not going to give you what you want.
Hmm.
And Sally Crumley was basically the I would say she was the leader on that,
Hmm.
and she would get behind the her Democratic members and crack the whip and say, "Don't you falter. We've got to do this to
Hmm.
help our people and our constituents." And
Hmm.
I can remember the second um, um, member of the county of the Greenville County Council got elected. He was a reverend, and he was an older man. I can't remember his name now, but he was starting to vote. He came out the gate voting with the Republicans, and
Hmm.
so Sally and them had to really get in his behind, mainly Sally, and then Ennis Fant, the first black member that was elected. kind of got in his behind and said, you know what, if you become a sellout, this is what's going to happen for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be dead on arrival as a second termer, as a second, and when you go for the second term.
Mm-hmm.
That's how that happened. That wasn't so much, I guess, a special interest as much as the Democrats wanted equity.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of the Democrats, and I can't remember his name now, but he kind of reminded me of that character. He kind of reminded me of the character in um, the Sidney Poitier movie where he slapped the white guy that slapped him, Heat of the Night.
Mm-hmm.
And he tipped me off to some bad conditions over at the Greenville County Correctional Center, the lockup.
Mm-hmm.
And I went over there, and the head of the correctional center thought I was going to be doing a nice softball kind of piece. And I started asking him questions about the kind of things I had heard about, like some of the correctional officers getting it on with some of the inmates in the cells, or worms being found in the food.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't get too much access about that. Then somebody else tipped me off about some skullduggery with the county sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was
Yeah.
trying to third party, and the third party snitched on me, and it
Mm-hmm.
caused some major problems that could have escalated had not Sally Crumley stepped in and told this person that snitched, if anything happens to that boy, you better give your heart to the Lord, because you know what will belong to the crows.
Mm. Why was she so supportive of you? What how did you become
I was the first reporter to actually report all of the news and not just report one side of the news that favored the Republicans.
mm-hmm.
I report the good, the bad, and the ugly for both sides.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't
Mm-hmm.
take sides. I didn't play favorites.
Mm-hmm. So
And like,
uh
I was so worthy that even the wife of one of the lead Republicans, whose name was Robert Leach, I don't even know if Robert's alive now, would tell me some things about what was going
mm-hmm.
on both sides that she didn't agree with.
Mm-hmm. But it's still so when you the, wrote on that what she did not agree with, did it get into print?
Yeah, it did.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the things she tipped me off about is led to that situation where the Republicans didn't want to talk to me
Mm-hmm.
on the thing, and the chair of the Republican Party quashed that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been what it's been for me, even as my career advanced. Like when I started working for a citizen newspaper group, which was a bunch of newspapers that report on the South Side, especially the far South Side and the South suburbs. Um, Not only would they call my publisher or my editors whenever I would run afoul of what the powers that be for the municipalities of the township
Mm-hmm.
with townships would want me to report. They would also distribute the newspapers, because it's a free newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
They would act, you imagine these little old white ladies with little bouffant hairdos passing, playing newspaper girl for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I had going. And I also formed some relationships with people when I was reporting when I was the South Suburban editor for the Citizen newspaper group, that further informed me on how to report on the news and how to follow the news that was going on in the South suburbs. One of them was a guy named Pete Leica, who was a longtime township supervisor for Bremen Township. And he would often tell me that he was born in Morgan Park, the neighborhood of Morgan Park on the far southwest side,
Mm-hmm.
when it was called the village of Morgan Park, just before it was annexed to Chicago as a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, Pete Leica was the chair the head of the Township Officials of Illinois, which is like the township counterpart of the Illinois Municipal League. And so he liked me enough to get me a free subscription to the TOI magazine. And he offered to get me discounts on some books publications they had, like doing assessments. But I said, no, well, I don't need that. I can pay for it.
Mhm. When you how do you balance activism and journalism and still be a fair journalist?
Well, I do it like Ida B. Wells did. I take my activism, I ask the questions of both sides, and then I report on the outcome. See, the thing is, I don't believe in objectivity, and I got that from my father, who quoted David Brinkley. Do you know who David Brinkley was?
NBC 5, right?
Yeah, he was on NBC for a long time.
Mm,
He started off as a newspaper man in North Carolina, and then
mm,
he went to radio, and then he went to eventually, ultimately to television. And
mm,
David Brinkley at one time said that there was no such thing as objectivity, because he said if you were objective, you'd have no feelings, and you would have no way to report the news in a way that would rivet people to what you're talking about. He
mm,
said, but you do balance the lack of objectivity with fairness.
mhm,
In fact, I would say that with my research, there's never been objectivity in journalism dating back to the early American period.
mhm,
You know, the people that like Jefferson or Madison or whoever would write under pseudonyms for different newspapers. They were very involved in politics, which would be a conflict of interest.
mhm,
Now, you have politicians or activists who are regular recurring commentators on like the likes of CNN and MSNBC.
mhm,
But I've always went for fairness.
mhm,
So when I decided to mingle my activism with um, with journalism, that's what I did, and I made it very clear to people that wanted me to take a side that I'm not on anybody's side. I'm on the side of my listeners and readers.
mhm,
What happened? In fact, I had an incident where one of the aldermen who remained nameless, um, one of his flying monkeys told me, "Oh, we want you to be with us." He. And I was like, and I was very deadpan about it. I was like, "I'm not with anybody." I said, "You're going to get the good, the bad, the ugly, but the most you can, as good as it's going to get, is you can expect fairness out of me."
mhm. What was the reaction to your fairness? Is were the papers or the journalistic outlets that you work for, were they paid for? Were they influenced by the special interest? And then how were you able to maintain your job if they were?
Well, it was difficult with writing for like a citizen newspaper group because they were all tied in to the publisher was tied in to certain politicians who bought advertising.
Hmm. Exactly.
I kind of walked a tightrope with that,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the short time I was with the Daily Southtown
Mm-hmm.
and what have you. But now that I'm working for myself, I can do whatever I want. But I
Mm-hmm.
still get to that fairness. I don't take sides.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I found out, which probably the people that work for the paid host couldn't do, is that Melanie Span Cooper, who is the um, chair and CEO of WVON FM 1690, is an appointed member and paid member of the Illinois Liquor Commission. So basically, she has a boss
Mm-hmm.
whose name is JB Pritzker.
Mm-hmm.
So to keep getting that good advertising from the Illinois Democratic Party's pipeline of corruption, as well as staying good with JB Pritzker, she has to her paid hosts have to be warned, and to an extent, some of her non-paid hosts have to not talk about how bad the Democrats are.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to support Tony Preckwinkle, who also pays them some checks because we've seen the checks.
Mm,
and they have to stay in good standing as far as Brandon Johnson's concerned. If you notice, probably I would say Brandon Johnson has had more interviews with WVON than with any other news organization or outlet,
mm,
because they pretty much do what they tell them to do as far as interviews. They throw them a lot of softball questions.
mm,
Whereas, remember, there was, I believe it was a Sun Times editorial board meeting that the mayor was scheduled to have, and he went in, and they had the nerve to tell them to their faces that they had to keep certain things off the record. And
mm,
they told them, "We're not keeping anything off the record. Are you crazy?" And they just walked out.
mm.
They just walked out.
Were you ever forced to make a choice between pleasing the advertisers and then staying true to your journalistic uh, integrity?
Yeah, that would have been at the Citizen,
Hmm.
but that was resolved when I quit and went on to greener pastures. And
Oh.
I
Mm,
say I'm very proud. This year was the 2024
mm,
Democratic National Convention was my second convention, but I
mm,
didn't go in as a pure news organization because my publishers didn't have the gumption to set up like a website or at least a Facebook page
mm,
for me to report out of. So I went in as an influencer, or as a what they call a creator influencer.
mm,
And I've since read that a lot of the creator influencers were either paid or somehow co-opted
mm,
by the head Waltz ticket or
mm,
the Democratic National Committee to report favorably on her.
mm,
I didn't have to do that because I went in like I always do, and someone was able to get me floor credentials so I could get on the convention floor and report.
mm,
So I did like I did during the 96 convention, which
mm,
then I reported from the rafters. And I got my best stories reporting out of the regular Democratic Party national convention machinery.
mm,
So in 96, one of my best stories that I reported in a piece for the source, no, I'm sorry, Herb magazine, rather,
mm,
was I ran into a 28-year-old Black female alternate delegate from Oklahoma. And she observed, she said, "Well, it's all well and good that everything's rubber stamped and everybody's so happy and all that, but is this really going to make a difference?" And this was at the time that the platform, under the co-chairing of Bobby Rush, the former Black Panther, included a plank of expanding the 1994 crime bill.
mm, mm,
I also had an interesting interview with Chuck D during that time at in the back of George's Music Room when George's Music Room was on the near west side in K-Town. And I asked him, what's the best way for hip hop and any other related culture, urban culture, to go? Should it be Republican? Should it be Democrat? What do you think? And he said, um, Mark, we need everybody and everywhere. We need hip hop's heads in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the Libertarian Party, the Communist Party, if there is still a Communist Party. We need to be all over in the process.
mm,
The other interesting story that came out of that convention was there was a Jesse Jackson Jr., who was then, I think, a freshly elected member of the House of Representatives out of the second congressional district, was having a news conference with a full court Black press that included a young April Ryan at that time. And they acted like they were just mortified to, to ask him anything because he was just coming off so reticent. So I said, well, I'm going to do like I did with Dale Evans and ask him the atom bomb question. So at
mm,
that time, Vibe magazine had described him and Harold Ford out of Tennessee as the hip hop candidates. although neither one of them identified with hip hop. In fact, I think both of them identified more with house than hip hop. And at that time, there was sort of a schism between hip hop and house music or dance music in Chicago. The house people looked down on the hip hop heads, and the hip hop heads turned up their nose
Mhm.
and were irate with house people. So anyway, I asked him. I said, "So they say that you and Congressman Ford are the hip hop candidates. How do you represent hip hop? What's in it for hip hop with you?" And he had that same narrow-eyed look that Dale Evans had. And he's like, these rappers need to organize themselves. Yeah, they need to organize themselves. And so I told him, I said, so it's really not about the whole culture. It's not about the breakers and the pop lockers and the graph artists and the knowledge people and the DJs. It's about the rappers for you. And he just kept saying these rappers need to organize themselves, and
Mhm.
that's what he said as the thing broke up. Similar to Dale Evans saying yeah, we're responsible for the big box projects like Gone with the Wind. If it wasn't for us, they wouldn't be able to get to where they got and
Mhm.
get those Oscars to Vivian Lee and for um, get Clark Gable. Now,
Mhm.
I didn't have the same kind of press come.
When you were at the Piedmont and also at the, let's say, at the Citizen, were you able to were you able to get out any pieces if they were against your pieces? Did you you
Yeah, yeah, I was.
and did it have to be pieces that did not affect the special interest, or you were able to did they have enough were they willing to put out some pieces that they and did they assign you pieces, or did you look for your own material?
I basically looked for my own material.
Mm.
Sometimes they would refer me to people to cover, and
Oh.
sometimes I would even cover uh, for the city editor when
Mm.
she couldn't cover certain things. Like I was there the night that
Mark,
Eugene.
we're very sorry, but we are out of time. We yeah, sorry. We'll talk again soon. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for joining us on WZRD Chicago 88.3 FM today. If our listeners want to learn more about you, where should they go?
they can email me at citizen Citizen
Mhm.
King KING 773 at yahoo.com, and I'd be glad to tell them about my experience at this 2024 convention, which was
Okay.
slightly different because I was able to mix my activism a lot more this time than I was in '96. So
Mhm. Okay. Thank
I
you
just
so much, Mark Armstrong, journalist and activist. Thank you so much for joining us.
sure.